the Greek influence on modern art is that what we see, what the Greeks developed in terms of art and architecture, we look at as what we call classical art. Classical art are those. It has to do with the well, certain proportions and ideal representations in figurative art and also in architecture. And the Greeks really liked to create realism with their figures and their sculptures, and they also liked geometry, and you see geometry in their architecture. You see the use of what's called the golden mean, very important geometric proportion in their architecture, and we still use that today when we're designing architecture. We use the golden mean to create harmony and proportion. So when we look at Greek art, it is really kind of the foundation for a lot of things that we see in what we call contemporary Western art or modern Western art. In the United States, there was a movement in the 1700s, actually in Europe and the United States, a movement towards what they called neoclassical art. And neoclassical was kind of a reinvention or a resurgence of Greco-Roman art, architecture and painting, sculpture. So there was a kind of connection to that historical past, looking back to the Greeks in their form of government, in their form of culture, and that really is the foundation for Western culture.
Well, mainly the architecture aspect. We have learned from the architecture in many ways. A great example will be the White House here in the United States. If you take a look at the White House, it had columns, and that's what the Greeks were known for. The columns were designed as a structural support to hold the weight of the roof. And basically, the Greeks have columns and flat roofs. That's basically what the architecture is. And if you look everywhere, you might find some residential homes with the Greek architecture, those columns and then flat roofs. Another way we have benefited from is their materials, the material use. And nowadays, in the year 2015, we are still using materials that the Greeks used to apply in their construction. For example, marble. You see marble everywhere. Kitchens, flooring, limestone, wood, and what else? Metals. And these are materials that we are still using, in the year 2015, because they're really strong and they're really pretty to the eye.
A tremendous impact, and you can see if you look at Western art in the Italian Renaissance period in the 1500s, the 1400s and 1500s. That's where artists and architects and scientists and others were looking back at the ideas of the Greeks and the Romans and reinventing some of the things that they came up with at that time, and doing it was a resurgence of the idea of classical beauty or classical art and architecture, and that trend has continued throughout the Western art world, and not just the Western art world. We do see influences in other parts of the world as well, but that trend has influenced all the way through basically from Italy up into Europe and into the United States, and is still a very strong part of our culture. And you can look at buildings and see columns on buildings, and that came from basically the Greeks or the Etruscans and also the Egyptians as well. But there's definitely a huge influence, and there will continue to be an influence on Western art by the Greeks.
Oh, a great impact. In order to see ahead, you need to see where you're coming from. What is your past? The past is very important in order for you to go to in order to work to the future. It has a big impact.
Without the Greek influence, You could probably say that it would be more like Native American, because really the influence comes up through Europe and then across into the United States, and that cultural influence is a Western cultural influence. So you might see, I mean, look at Native American art, or maybe Mesoamerican art of the Mayans or Aztecs, and that's artwork that's not influenced at all by the Greeks. You know, even when if you look at Chinese art, we can detect a Greek influence in the Chinese sculpture, Buddhist sculpture, things like that. But in Mayan and Aztec and Incan art, we don't see any influence whatsoever. So it might be something like that.
Well, it would make a big impact, because we always learn from the past. In, you know, like I said before, the materials. You know, the materials, we're still using them. So if it wasn't for the Greeks, I don't know, you know, we could be using a different type of material, So they have a lot of influence. You know, the past has a lot of influence in the